I never expected my new home to feel like a stage. Every smile rehearsed, every word sharpened. On my wedding day, my mother-in-law hugged me so tightly the cameras captured a perfect family moment, yet her whisper burned colder than the winter air. "You'll never be one of us." At first, I thought I had misheard, but the days that followed proved her cruelty wasn't an accident. It was tradition. They laughed around the dinner table, leaving me in silence, treating me like a guest in the house I had already claimed. If only they knew whose name was on the deed. The day I married Daniel felt like stepping into a dream carefully curated for an audience. The flowers were perfect, the vows sounded sincere, and when his mother pulled me into her arms, the camera flashes made it look like a moment worth framing. But beneath the layers of perfume and silk, her whisper slid into my ear, "You'll never be one of us." My smile never wavered for the photos, but a chill spread through my chest that no applause could thaw. When we first moved into the family home, she welcomed me with warmth so polished it gleamed. Every morning she asked if I had slept well. Every evening she complimented my cooking with a tilt of the head that carried more weight than her words. "You seasoned it beautifully," she said once, then added with a sweet smile, "almost as good as the maid we used to have." Daniel chuckled nervously, mistaking her jab for a joke, but I caught the sharpness hidden in the sugar. The dinners grew heavier with each passing day. Conversations flowed like wine across the table, spilling stories of childhood memories and inside jokes that shut me out. Whenever I tried to join in, someone would talk over me, their laughter swelling just enough to drown my words. I sat at the edge of the table, my plate always served last, my presence acknowledged only when convenient. Gaslighting wrapped itself around me like invisible chains. "Don't be so sensitive, Emma. We're just teasing." Yet I knew the sting wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. One night, as I cleared the dishes, I lingered in the hallway where shadows swallowed the corners. I heard my mother-in-law's voice, low and certain, drifting from the living room. "She's just a guest. This will never be her home." My heart slammed against my ribs, but I didn't make a sound. I walked back into the kitchen with my head held high, swallowing the hurt like poison, storing it for later. The cracks in the illusion widened. At every meal, my chair was pushed slightly farther from the center, as though an invisible line had been drawn to separate me from family. Photographs filled the walls. Daniel as a child, his siblings, cousins, every graduation and holiday immortalized in glossy frames. But as weeks passed and new pictures were added, none bore my face. I existed in their lives, but not in their story. Daniel noticed I could see it in the way his eyes darted toward me when his mother corrected me in front of guests, yet he stayed silent, caught between loyalty and fear. One evening, I leaned closer to him as laughter erupted around the table and whispered, "Why am I always the one left out?" His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his hand gripping his glass as though words might shatter it. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was tradition. Perhaps they needed time. But the night I stood in the dimly lit hallway, everything I suspected crystallized. I had woken to the sound of drawers opening and soft footsteps. I followed the faint glow spilling from the study. There she was, my mother-in-law, her face stern under the lamp, rifling through papers with quick, practiced hands. My pulse quickened when I saw the familiar folder she pulled from the drawer, the property documents. She flipped through the pages with impatience, muttering under her breath. Her eyes scanned the lines, her lips curling as though searching for proof that the house was hers alone to claim. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The urge to step forward and expose her burned through me, but I stayed hidden in the shadows. Watching her illuminated by the lamplight, I realized she wasn't just dismissing me. She was preparing for war. I backed away silently, every step echoing louder in my head than it did in the hallway. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a simmering fire I hadn't felt before. She thought I was weak, a guest, an outsider clinging to her son's name. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet was already mine. The walls that had rejected me, the table that pushed me away, the house that framed me as invisible, it all belonged to me in ways she hadn't even begun to imagine. As I slipped back into bed beside Daniel, I kept my breathing steady, pretending to sleep, but my eyes stayed open, fixed on the darkness. For the first time, I wasn't mourning their rejection. I was planning. The mask of welcome had cracked, and behind it, a battlefield waited, and I had every intention of winning. It began with an innocent suggestion, wrapped in the silk of tradition. Over dinner, my mother-in-law dabbed her lips with a napkin, her voice warm enough to pass as care. "Daniel, we should revisit the inheritance papers," she said. "It's only proper that the family home stays in the Turner bloodline. Emma is young. She doesn't need the burden of responsibility yet." Her eyes flicked toward me, then away, as if I were too fragile to notice. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mother, we already have the papers in order." "Old papers," she corrected, her tone clipped. "Times change. Families grow. It's about security. For all of us." I lowered my gaze, feigning confusion, pretending to focus on my fork scraping lightly against porcelain. But inside, every word seared itself into memory. I had tucked a small recording device into my purse before dinner, a precaution I never thought I'd need so soon. As laughter filled the room, I pressed the button beneath the tablecloth, catching every syllable as she pressed Daniel to sign his name and quietly erase mine from the future. Later that night, when the dishes had been cleared and the house grew quiet, I replayed the conversation in the solitude of our bedroom. Her words hissed through the tiny speaker like venom. "Emma doesn't need to be involved. This is a family matter." My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. The first trap had been laid, but it wasn't mine. The next morning, as I searched through a drawer for stationery, my fingers brushed against something unexpected, a faded envelope wedged deep beneath stacks of old receipts. The paper was brittle, the seal broken long ago. I pulled it out, heart pounding as though it had been waiting for me. Inside lay the original property deed, yellowed with time, but clear enough to read. My name stood firm on the title, signed and notarized before my marriage. Proof, undeniable and absolute, that this house was never theirs to claim. The discovery ignited a spark I hadn't allowed myself to feel until then. Power. But power meant nothing without proof. That evening, I began setting my own blueprint into motion. While Daniel read in the living room, I slipped quietly through the house, adjusting the tiny cameras I had hidden when we first moved in. At the time, I told myself it was for safety, a habit from living alone in the city. Now they became my arsenal. Every whispered insult, every schemed manipulation, every attempt to strip me away, I captured it all. In the days that followed, I noticed the pattern more clearly. My mother-in-law's words dripped like honey whenever Daniel was present, but the moment he stepped away, the mask slid off. "You're only here because of him," she told me once, her lips curved in a smile sharp enough to cut. "Don't mistake courtesy for acceptance." Or I smiled back, silent, the red light of a hidden camera blinking behind a vase just over her shoulder. One afternoon, while tending to the front garden, Mrs. Hill from next door leaned against the fence. She was an older woman with kind eyes, the kind who noticed more than she ever said. Her voice dropped low as she glanced toward the Turner house. "Be careful, Emma," she warned. "You're not the first she's tried to push out. Years ago, her own brother's wife lost everything when papers were rewritten overnight. She knows how to play this game." Her words settled heavy in my chest, but instead of fear, I felt clarity. My mother-in-law wasn't acting out of sudden malice. This was her craft, her legacy, and I was the next intended casualty. That night, Daniel confronted her. I stayed in the hallway, hidden in the dark, as his voice wavered between respect and doubt. "Mother, why are you pressing me about the deed? Why does it matter so much who holds the title?" Her reply was quick, too quick. Because it is ours. Because it belongs to the family. But Emma is my family, Daniel said, softer, uncertain. I held my breath, every word carving fissures in the foundation of their bond. For the first time, the seed of suspicion had been planted, not by me, but by her insistence, her greed. When the house finally fell silent, I returned to my room. I pulled open the drawer of my vanity, revealing the hidden compartment where I kept the original deed, the recordings, and the footage pulled from my cameras. My arsenal, my truth. I locked the small safe with deliberate care, the click of metal echoing in the quiet room. Leaning close, I whispered to myself, the words sharp and steady. The game has only just begun. The invitation arrived on thick ivory paper, embossed with the Turner crest, as though royalty resided within these crumbling walls. My mother-in-law insisted we host a family gathering to celebrate tradition. I knew better. This wasn't a celebration, it was a stage, and I was the prop she intended to humiliate. The night of the dinner, every cousin, aunt, and distant relative filled the house with laughter and polished smiles. I wore a simple navy dress, understated, while she dazzled in pearls, commanding attention as though she were queen. Midway through the meal, she raised her glass and said sweetly, "Family is our most precious inheritance. Blood, after all, is thicker than paper." Her eyes landed on me, and the table erupted in polite chuckles, the joke disguised as wisdom. She wove her narrative with precision, painting me as naive, dependent, someone clinging to Daniel for stability. "Emma has such a kind heart," she said, tilting her head in mock affection. "It's not her fault she doesn't understand how these things work. She didn't grow up in a family like ours." Laughter followed, sharp and cutting. I lowered my gaze, biting the inside of my cheek, playing the role she assigned me. Every word, every insult, I absorbed in silence. Yet beneath the table, my phone rested against my thigh, recording the entire scene. By dessert, her performance reached its crescendo. She told a story of how Daniel once nearly lost the house to a reckless mistake, and how she had swooped in to save the family. The implication was clear. Without her, we would all be homeless. Without her, I wouldn't exist in their world at all. Gasps of admiration circled the table, and I pretended to shrink, to wilt under the weight of her myth. But when the evening ended and the guests returned to their homes, I uploaded the recording to the private Turner family chat. Within minutes, messages poured in. Cousins whispering disbelief, aunts questioning her intentions, siblings typing half-finished defenses. For the first time, her carefully polished mask cracked not in front of me, but in front of the bloodline she worshipped. The illusion of her power was unraveling, and she didn't even know it yet. Days later, the air in the house shifted. Conversations hushed when I entered the room, but not in the way they used to. Daniel confronted me in the kitchen, confusion etched across his face. "Why didn't you tell me you recorded that dinner?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me otherwise," I replied calmly. "Now you've seen what she really thinks of me." His silence said everything. For the first time, doubt shadowed his loyalty. It was in that fragile space that the deeper truth revealed itself. I discovered it almost by accident. Late one night, I returned to the study where I had once seen my mother-in-law rifling through papers. This time, the desk drawer was unlocked. Inside, alongside financial ledgers and letters, I found a series of documents signed by another hand, Daniel's uncle, Richard. The handwriting was bold, the amounts staggering. Loans, repayments, overdue notices, hidden debts that stretched back years. The realization struck me with terrifying clarity. My mother-in-law's crusade against me was not merely about pride. It was diversion, a smokescreen to protect Richard, whose financial recklessness threatened to expose the entire family. When I confronted Daniel with the papers, his hands shook as he read them. This can't be true. Uncle Richard has always been the one advising us. He said he was protecting our assets. Protecting? I said softly. Or draining? The puzzle rearranged itself in my mind. Every cruel comment, every staged humiliation, it had been designed not just to diminish me, but to keep attention fixed on my supposed unworthiness, all while the true thief worked in silence. That night, I stood before the mirror, studying the reflection that stared back at me. For weeks, I had believed my mother-in-law was the enemy, the shadow haunting every corner of my marriage. But as I traced the lines of my own tired face, I understood. She was only a puppet dancing to strings pulled by someone darker, someone hungrier. The true enemy wasn't the woman who whispered that I didn't belong. It was the man in the background, manipulating her desperation for his own gain. The reflection's eyes hardened. The real battle hasn't even started, I whispered to the empty room. The rumors spread like smoke, curling through the Turner family tree until every branch whispered the same poisoned tale. I was a gold digger. I had trapped Daniel, refused to give him children, and now lived off the fortune his family had built. The whispers carried weight because they were seeded by my mother-in-law herself, her voice careful, sorrowful, as though she pitied her son for being deceived by me. At first, I ignored them. I had proof. I had recordings. I had the deed. But the words dug into me, resurfacing in the pitying glances of relatives, the awkward silences at family gatherings, the sudden distance in Daniel's own eyes. The air in the house grew heavy with judgment, every hallway echoing with conversations that stopped the moment I walked by. The breaking point came during a Sunday dinner, where half the extended family crowded into the dining room. My mother-in-law stood, a matriarch on her stage, and announced with a tremor of theatrical grief, "We all know Emma has taken advantage of my son. She refuses to give him an heir, and yet she clings to this house as if it were hers to claim." Gasps filled the room. My cheeks flushed, but not with shame, with fury. I rose slowly, steadying myself with the edge of the table. My voice didn't rise. It cut. "This house is mine." The room fell silent, every breath sucked out at once. I walked to the study, unlocked the safe, and returned with the envelope, the original deed, signed, notarized, irrefutable. I placed it on the table for all to see. I bought this house before I married Daniel. Every brick, every wall, every inch of it belongs to me. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then chaos erupted. Questions, accusations, disbelief tumbling over each other. My mother-in-law staggered back, her hand clutching her chest as if the truth itself had struck her. Her face drained of color, her body trembling. And then, with a sound like air rushing from a balloon, she collapsed into her chair. But even as relatives rushed to her side, my ears caught a new sound, a voice, low but steady, slicing through the noise. This house was never the Turner family's to begin with. The words stilled the room. Heads turned toward the speaker, Richard, Daniel's uncle. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, as though he had lost control of the script. The truth, long buried, clawed its way into the light. In the days that followed, the revelation spread faster than any rumor. The Turner legacy was a myth. The house they so proudly flaunted as their ancestral home had never belonged to them. It was mine, built from my work, my savings, my independence before I ever took Daniel's name. One by one, the masks fell. The aunts who once sneered at me avoided my gaze. Cousins whispered apologies, their loyalty wobbling now that the illusion of heritage had been shattered. Even Daniel stood speechless, staring at the papers as though seeing me for the first time. When my mother-in-law awoke from her fainting spell, her fury was muted, stripped of its authority. She raged, insisting the house was rightfully theirs, that I had tricked them, but the proof was undeniable. Her empire of manipulation crumbled into dust at her feet, and then came the moment I had waited for. Daniel stood beside me, his hand slipping into mine. His voice was quiet, but clear enough for the entire room to hear. Emma is my family. This house is hers, and I stand with her. The shift in power was palpable. My mother-in-law's eyes widened, not at the loss of the house, but at the loss of her son's unquestioning loyalty. That, more than anything, broke her. I stepped closer to her, my gaze steady, unflinching. For the first time, I didn't call her Mom. I didn't try to bridge the chasm she had carved between us. "You're a stranger," I said softly, each word deliberate, final. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock, but of defeat. For a fleeting moment, victory tasted sweet. I had exposed the lies, shattered the illusion of Turner legacy, and secured my rightful place. But power, I learned quickly, was a poisoned crown. The more I wore it, the heavier it pressed against my skull. The relatives who once mocked me now eyed me with suspicion. Their deference wasn't respect. It was fear disguised as politeness. Conversation stopped when I entered a room. Laughter curdled into silence. Invitations to family events grew scarce, and when they did arrive, they were perfunctory, laced with obligation rather than warmth. But I could have endured all that if it had not begun to eat into my marriage. Daniel tried, I know he did. He defended me, stood beside me in public. But I saw the way his shoulders sagged when his cousins whispered into his ear, the way his mother's accusations gnawed at him. "She's isolating you from us," they told him. "She only cares about the house, not the family." He never repeated the words to me, but he didn't have to. I saw them in the way his eyes dimmed when he looked at me, as if wondering if they were right. One evening, as I prepared dinner, he lingered in the doorway, his voice hesitant. "Emma, do you ever think maybe we rushed into this? That maybe we should have done things differently?" It wasn't a question. It was doubt, raw and unfiltered. I set the knife down slowly, my chest tight. "You're asking if marrying me was a mistake." His silence was an answer. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering glow of my phone. A new email arrived in my inbox, subject line blank. Against better judgment, I opened it. My breath caught. On the screen were photos of me, years old, taken long before I met Daniel. Images of me leaving a courthouse, my face pale, my expression shattered. Attached was a single line of text. "Does he know who you really are?" My stomach turned. I thought I had buried that part of my past, locked it away with the mistakes and heartbreaks that preceded Daniel. Someone had dug it up, and now threatened to use it against me. The weight of the crown grew unbearable. Days later, the betrayal revealed itself in the cruelest of ways. It was Daniel's younger sister, Claire, the only one who had shown me kindness in this house of knives. She had smiled at me when others scowled, slipped me notes of encouragement, confided that she admired my strength. I had believed she was my ally, until I overheard her on the phone, her voice hushed but unmistakable. "Yes, I sent the pictures. She needs to be taken down a notch. She thinks she owns everything now. It's disgusting." My hands trembled as I gripped the banister, her words cutting deeper than any wound her mother had ever inflicted. Betrayal from an enemy was expected. Betrayal from a friend left scars that never healed. When I confronted her, she didn't flinch. "You don't belong here, Emma. You never will. At least Mother is honest about hating you. I tried to help you, but you took everything. Now I'll make sure Daniel sees the real you." Her words were venom, but her calmness was worse. She meant every syllable. That night, I sat in the study, the deed resting on the desk before me, the cameras recording the silence of the house. I should have felt triumphant. After all, I had won. The house was mine, the lies exposed, the mask torn away. But as I stared at the empty chairs, the cold walls, the echo of footsteps that weren't mine, I realized the hollowness of victory. Justice had a price, and it was loneliness. The house was silent, yet it roared with absence. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and whispered into the darkness. Did I really win? Or did I lose everything that mattered? The storm had reached its peak, but I refused to be swept away. For weeks, the Turner family whispered, schemed, and clawed at the walls of the house they believed was their inheritance. My mother-in-law, humiliated yet defiant, rallied her siblings and cousins, while Uncle Richard moved quietly behind the scenes, trying to mask the debts that had hollowed out the family fortune. But I no longer cared about surviving their games. Survival was not enough. I wanted to end the system that had weaponized bloodlines, the cycle that had reduced me to a pawn. This was no longer about winning a house. It was about rewriting the rules of the game. I gathered the documents, the property deed, the recordings, the hidden ledgers of debt Richard had buried for years. With the help of a lawyer, I filed a lawsuit. It was not simply a fight for ownership, but a case built to expose the manipulation, the fraud, and the coercion that had defined the Turner name for generations. When the court date arrived, I walked into the courtroom not as a daughter-in-law seeking approval, but as a woman reclaiming her voice. My mother-in-law sat stiff in the gallery, her pearls gleaming but her eyes hollow. Richard smirked from the defense table, confident in the influence he thought money still carried. Daniel sat beside me, torn but present, his hand brushing mine like a lifeline he wasn't sure he could still hold. The proceedings stretched over days. My lawyer presented every shred of evidence. Recordings of conversations where my mother-in-law schemed to erase me from the inheritance, documents proving Richard's embezzlement, witness testimony from neighbors who had seen the same tactics before. Piece by piece, the facade crumbled. On the final day, Richard's composure shattered. Under cross-examination, he admitted to siphoning funds, justifying it as family necessity. My mother-in-law wept in frustration, insisting her only intention had been to protect her son. But the truth was no longer theirs to distort. The judge's words rang like a gavel striking stone. This court recognizes Emma Turner as the sole legal owner of the property. Furthermore, evidence of financial misconduct by Richard Turner will be forwarded for further investigation. The room erupted. My mother-in-law gasped, her body slumping as if the verdict had stolen the last of her strength. Richard cursed under his breath, his empire of deceit dissolving in the light of truth. Daniel turned to me, eyes wide, whispering, "You did it." But I didn't smile. Winning the case wasn't triumph. It was liberation. For the first time, the chains of their control snapped. That night, I walked through the house in silence. The walls felt different, as though they no longer listened to the whispers of the Turners. For the first time, I felt its weight shift from battlefield to sanctuary. But even then, I knew bricks and timber could not heal wounds carved by betrayal. In the weeks that followed, I began reshaping not just the house, but the life within it. The photographs of the Turner family came down, one by one, replaced not with new frames, but with blank walls that breathed space and light. I invited people I trusted, friends from before my marriage, colleagues, neighbors, to share meals at the table where I had once been silenced. Laughter returned, not the brittle kind that mocked, but the kind that filled a room with warmth. I poured energy into my work again, building projects that bore my name rather than his family's shadow. The house became more than a possession. It became a hub, a living testament that family was not inherited through bloodlines, but built through loyalty and choice. Yet, like a ghost, my mother-in-law remained. She no longer commanded the house, but she lingered in a small upstairs room, a widow in her own kingdom. I would see her sometimes. Sitting by the window, her reflection etched against the glass like a portrait of grief. She no longer spoke to me with venom, but with silence that carried a weight heavier than any insult. One evening, I passed by her door and paused. Inside, she sat in her chair, the pearls around her neck dulled, her posture bent. She did not look at me, did not acknowledge me, and for the first time I felt no anger, only distance. I whispered softly, almost to myself, family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty. The words carried into the room, but she didn't turn her head. Perhaps she didn't hear, or perhaps she simply had nothing left to answer. Standing there, I realized something that unsettled me. I had won every battle, yet I stood alone on the field. Justice had been served, but justice did not restore love. It did not rebuild trust. It did not erase the loneliness that victory left behind. I walked back downstairs, the house echoing with my footsteps. It was mine, every inch of it, but the question lingered like smoke I couldn't clear. Had I claimed freedom, or had I traded family for power? The night stretched long, the house vast around me. I sat in the living room staring at the flicker of the fireplace. My reflection shimmered in the glass, eyes sharp, shoulders squared, strong, unyielding. And yet, beneath it, I wondered, would I ever soften again? The legacy had shifted. I had broken the cycle, exposed the truth, and claimed what was rightfully mine. But the price of power was not measured in money or property. It was measured in solitude. As the fire burned low, I let the silence answer the question no one dared to ask. Had I become free, or had I become exactly what they always feared I would be?